Greetings and welcome back, gentles and ladiesmen, to another installment of the comprehensive Klonoa Marathon. I'm ExoParadigmGamer, and today we're going to be kicking things off by discussing 2002's Klonoa Beach Volleyball for the PlayStation 1, before tying up some loose ends and wrapping up this marathon altogether. We've got a lot to talk about, so let's jump right in.
One thing I should mention right off the bat is that Klonoa Beach Volleyball was actually released between Dream Champ Tournament and Legendary Star Medal, so I broke continuity by reviewing Klonoa Heroes first. I did this because I was certain I'd have a lot to say about the action RPG, and not so much to say about the volleyball game. It just made more sense to me to group the shorter review with the other Klonoa media and my final thoughts, so that's what I'm gonna do. At any rate, Klonoa Beach Volleyball first hit Japanese shelves in April of 2002, with the European release following 5 months later. Information on its development is practically non-existent, so I don't know what inspired Namco to greenlight this game to begin with. I mean, I can understand Mario branching into various sports such as racing or golf because he's well known and recognizable. Putting Mario into a sports game is a fiscally sound way of expanding on the Mario brand. Klonoa, suffice it to say, is a lot more niche, so you've gotta wonder what compelled Namco to mix him with beach volleyball of all things. Now, to be clear, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm just shocked that this game exists, particularly given Klonoa's limited financial success after Door to Phantomile. I'm also curious as to why this game was released on the PS1, when Lunatea's Veil had already launched on the PS2 the year before, or why this game never got a North American release. All the necessary English localization was already completed for the European version, so why not publish it across the pond as well? I'm sure Namco just didn't want to spare the expense for a North American release. Moving on to Klonoa Beach Volleyball proper, it feels really weird to be reviewing a game like this. If you haven't already guessed, I'm largely into single-player centric action games for the most part, chiefly action platforming games or adventure games. I love plenty of games from several other genres, with survival horror being the only one I actually dislike, but if there's one branch of gaming I feel entirely indifferent about, it's sports, with the exception of the occasional racing game. I don't even really enjoy playing sports in real life, so you can imagine how much fun I'd have playing a digital simulation of a sport. If I wasn't doing a comprehensive look at every Klonoa game, I probably would have skipped out on this game altogether. What I'm trying to say is that if you're expecting a genre-savvy analysis of Klonoa Beach Volleyball that's sprinkled with insightful comparisons to other games on the market, that's not something I can give you. I'm going to focus on whether Klonoa Beach Volleyball is an enjoyable game on its own merits, and whether it's worth picking up if you're a fan of the series in general. With that out of the way, let's talk about the plot. You know how I said in the Empire of Dreams review that I thought this game had a more interesting setup? Now that I've actually completed the championship mode several times as multiple characters, I'd like to retract that statement. The plot of Klonoa Beach Volleyball is about as bare bones as it gets. In fact, beyond a handful of cutscenes towards the end of the championship mode, there's hardly any story whatsoever. This game doesn't even have an opening cutscene, and since I can't find a scan of the European manual anywhere online, I couldn't tell you if the story's mentioned there either. As far as I can gather, the story is quite similar to that of Dream Champ Tournament. The roboticist Garland has teamed up with the nightmare entity Nahatum to host a beach volleyball tournament, with the winner receiving a huge cash prize. So Klonoa and company enter the tournament in the hopes of winning. Depending on which character you pick, you win the tournament and get one of 12 endings, which are easily the most interesting part of the story. Many of the side characters from the previous games even make cameos. Joka tries to multiply his prize money and gets called out for counterfeiting, Leorna steals Garland's mansion when he refuses to cough up the prize money, and Klonoa is just happy to be playing volleyball with all of his friends. The most interesting of the bunch is definitely Guntz's ending, which ties into his character arc from Legendary Star Medal. What's also interesting about this game presentation-wise is that it's the first Klonoa game to feature voice acting not performed in Phantom Island. If you've ever wanted to hear what all of your favorite Klonoa characters sound like with British and Australian accents, then here you go. I've gotta say though, the casting director did a terrific job. The new voice actors don't sound exactly like the original Phantom Island cast, but they do fit the characters quite well, with Joka even sounding like he did in the Wii Door to Phantomile.
Be nice to me!
Oh my, what have we here? It's just some little baby mice. Well, this won't do at all.
The guy who does Klonoa doesn't quite match Kumiko Watanabe, but he's still a hell of a lot more fitting than Eric Stitt. And that's about all there is to the story in this game, and seeing as it's a spin-off sports game, it's probably good enough.
I guess I'm just a little disappointed, given the elaborate storytelling of all the other games. But like I said, it gets the job done. In terms of the aesthetics, it's pretty well done for a sports spin-off game. The graphics are excellent by the standards of the PS1, featuring great looking character models with rich, colorful textures and detailed, beautiful backgrounds. It kinda makes you wonder why Door to Phantomile used sprites when Namco could make models that look this good on PS1. My only complaint is that many of the characters' hands and feet often seem separated from their bodies, which isn't really noticeable during the heat of the gameplay, but is pretty glaring in the results screen. I guess if I really wanted to nitpick, I'd also say that the character models look noticeably jaggy on the edges, but it's the PS1, so I'll cut it some slack. The overall art direction is vibrant and cartoony, which works well for a Klonoa game and holds up wonderfully. Visually, I'd say Klonoa Beach Volleyball is top-notch for a late-release PlayStation game. Sound-wise, it's pretty good, but kind of limited compared to the console games. There are maybe 20-some tracks in the whole game, and that's including the menu themes and whatnot. A large part of that is due to the small number of courts to play on, but even aside from that, much of it's not that memorable. That's not to say that the music's bad, it engages your ears fine enough, but I don't foresee myself humming or whistling the theme to Jungle Court the same way I could whistle Gotzaland or the Volky song. I will say, however, that the instrument quality is top-notch, and everything's also stylized to fit a beach motif, so it's still got some things going for it. The theme to Sunset Court, which is a fantastic remix of Gunce's theme from Klonoa Heroes, is also one of my favorite songs in the entire series, so it's not like the soundtrack doesn't have its moments of brilliance. Overall, I'd say the sound is good, just not great. Moving on to the gameplay, it's hard to know where to start. I suppose in many ways, Klonoa Beach Volleyball is fairly typical for a sports game. There's a tournament mode called Championship Mode, and an exhibition mode where you can pick the characters, court, and opponents of your choice. All of the main characters from the previous games have gathered together into an impressive 12-character roster, starting with Klonoa, Lolo, Popka, Joka, Chipple, Tat, and Leorna. Or is it Leorina? Leorina? Leorna? I don't know, I'm just gonna keep calling her Leorna. Guns and Garland are also playable, as well as 2 additional characters, but you'll have to unlock them by beating the championship mode with a sufficient number of characters. Supposedly, each character has their own stats and handles slightly differently, but beyond the super attacks, I hardly noticed a difference. But I do have to give the game credit for fitting all of my favorite characters into one roster. There are 5 courts to play on starting out, including a beach, breeze gale, a four-lock forest looking court, a harbor looking court, and Nahatum's palace. 2 additional courts can be unlocked by finishing the championship mode with enough characters, but for the most part it's a purely cosmetic difference. There aren't any court-specific hazards or gimmicks to shake things up, which I honestly don't mind that much. What I do mind is the limited selection and the lack of inspiration from previous Klonoa titles. I'm glad that Breeze Gale made the cut, but where's the theme park style Joyland stage? Where's the Volk City stage with the Volkies dropping bombs on each other in the background? The character selection did a good job drawing from past titles, so it's disappointing that the courts couldn't do the same. It also couldn't have hurt the developers to have included a few more courts. The championship mode features the same 5 courts in the same order every time, and you start to feel like you're running through the motions pretty quickly. Not a deal breaker, but certainly a disappointment. As far as the controls and mechanics go, I've certainly played nothing like it before. Again, I haven't played the likes of Dead or Alive Beach Volleyball, so I can't offer any comparisons. I do have to give the game credit for including a training mode. Klonoa will walk you through the controls and explain the rules of volleyball at a comfortable pace and give you exercises to help you acclimatize to the mechanics. The controls didn't click with me right away, and something about them still feels off, but after a while I mastered them enough to win some matches and start unlocking stuff. The greatest difficulty I encountered was trying to aim the ball. By pressing different directions on the D-pad, you'll aim the ball to that section of the opposing court. When you're serving, it works fine, but I did have to get used to the idea of holding the direction before I hit the ball back, instead of pressing it at the time of the hit itself. When you're trying to hit the ball back over the net in the heat of the match, however, you begin to realize the limitations of this control scheme. The D-pad controls your character and your partner, and also controls the trajectory of the ball when you hit it. And because you have to hold the direction before you hit the ball and not as you hit it, your ball is more than likely going to keep going in the direction you were approaching the ball from. It's a lot to juggle on just one D-pad, and it just makes you wish that the ball's trajectory was mapped to the right stick so you could control that and your character independently. Let me be clear when I say that the controls are perfectly functional and never presented a huge hindrance to my enjoyment of the game. All I'm saying is that it's difficult to strategize the direction of your hits because the aiming controls aren't mapped in a way that's conducive to the fast-paced gameplay, which comes off as a mild handicap. A more definite problem, on the other hand, is the super attacks, which only seem to work when they feel like it. To use them, you have to land points in a row along the opponent's court. Activating them, you'd think it'd be as simple as getting in the ball's path and hitting circle, but half the time the ball just soars past you and you lose a point. Apart from that, there's really not much more to say. It's beach volleyball. I suck at net sports in real life, and I probably suck at this game just as much. But I honestly can't tell if that's because the controls are as limited as I think they are, or if I'm just doing something wrong. I'll give the game the benefit of the doubt on this one, because my recent live streams have demonstrated to me that I'm not perfect.
Let's open up my browser on my phone.
Oh, I can't wait to see that.
The underlying problem is that it's hard to figure out a good strategy with a control scheme like this. You just kind of have to keep bopping the ball back and forth and hope for the best, just like in real life. While I guess that makes the game fairly realistic, it isn't very interesting from a gameplay standpoint. Like I said, I'm willing to concede that I'm doing something wrong, but I honestly don't know what it is. There's also multiplayer support where you and up to 4 friends can face off in a 2v2 match in the exhibition mode, or team up with one friend to take on the championship mode. It's a little easier to manage the direction of your hits when you don't have to control both characters at once. Because you're playing with friends, there's some teamwork involved that's just not there in the single player mode, making it a more enjoyable experience overall. Only thing is, if you're gonna invite someone over to play local multiplayer, I feel like there are tons of games you'd want to play instead. And that's really all I have to say about Klonoa Beach Volleyball. I hope I'm not disappointing anyone who was hoping for the same in-depth treatment I gave to the other Klonoa titles, but there's really only so much I can say about this game. If you've read the title, you know exactly what to expect. It's Klonoa, it's beach volleyball. For what it is, it's quite alright. I'd rather replay Moonlight Museum over this game if I'm being perfectly honest, but it's got great graphics, a decent soundtrack, a slew of recognizable characters to play, as well as a few difficulty options and a training mode to increase accessibility and lasting appeal. If it weren't for the limited control scheme and the small number of courts to play on, I'd say it's the best a game like this could possibly be. As is, however, it's a decent game that I can kind of recommend to fans of the series, or to people who like volleyball. While Klonoa Beach Volleyball may be the final game in the series, there's plenty of other Klonoa-related media worth discussing. So before we wrap things up, let's take a brief look at some of Klonoa's other adventures. First up is Shippu Tengoku Kaze no Klonoa, a 2-volume manga published exclusively in Japan from 2002 to 2003. Written by Hiroshi Kato and published by Koro Koro Comics, the manga follows Klonoa's adventures in Windy City as he attempts to foil villains, catch criminals, and save the day. Featuring a vibrant cast pulled from all the games, the manga comedically subverts everything you take for granted about Klonoa and company. Much like his incarnation in Klonoa Heroes, this Klonoa is dedicated to proving himself as a hero in his own right, but he often ends up causing more trouble than he resolves, due to his clumsy nature and lack of common sense. His best friend and sidekick is Mu, the Windy City postman, who is strongly implied to be Heart Mu from Klonoa Beach Volleyball. Surprisingly though, Mu is actually one of the most interesting characters. While Klonoa is hot-headed and quick to jump to conclusions, Mu is calm-tempered and thinks things through, acting as a comedic foil. Mu often has to help Klonoa get back on the right track, and can be both violently disappointed or genuinely engaged in Klonoa's endeavors, depending on what the situation calls for. And that's what makes the Klonoa manga so much fun. It recreates everything we love about these characters while also changing them enough to make things feel fresh. The main characters are essentially like the ones from the video games, but they take on comedic qualities while also being well developed and multifaceted. Garland is one of my favorites in this regard. The first time you see him, he takes on the role of antagonist and is genuinely intimidating. In many of his later appearances, however, he just sort of tags along in whatever Klonoa, Mu, Lolo, and the gang happen to be doing that day, and there never feels like there's a disconnect. It's kind of like how you can believe that the Captain Quark from Ratchet & Clank 2 is the same one that appears in Ratchet & Clank 3. I love it when characters can take on such different roles yet still feel like the same singular person. Many of the other characters are like this as well. Pango shows up partway through the second volume, but the
manga subverts his patient fatherly temperament from the games by giving him a very dark side. Calling Pango a turtle sends him into a violent, explosive spasm that he doesn't even remember seconds afterwards. The manga is also great about referencing details and moments from the games with a comedic twist. The final chapter of the first volume features an adaptation of Klonoa Beach Volleyball of all things, with Guns and Joka showing up to blow away all the competition and take the prize money by force. Garland, feeling shafted, uses his machinery to take control of Klonoa and slapstick antics ensue. On top of all the great characters and the references to the games, the manga just has a lot of great comedic setups. My favorite chapter opens with Lolo accidentally dropping a fridge on Klonoa's head. She tries to take off his hat to bandage the wounds, only to find that Klonoa is strongly committed to keeping his hat on. Mu and Lolo realize that they've never seen what Klonoa looks like without his hat, at which point Garland suddenly shows up and speculates with them as to what Klonoa's secret might be. What follows is a Looney Tunes inspired montage of over-the-top schemes by Mu, Lolo, and Garland to remove Klonoa's hat.
And it's absolutely hysterical.
Eventually, Garland reaches a boiling point and mounts a robotic death mech to remove Klonoa's hat by force, revealing a serious, determined, and mature Klonoa that we see little of in the rest of the manga. The climax is amazing, and I dare not spoil it here. All in all, the Klonoa manga is simply brilliant, and I can't recommend it enough, especially to fans of the series. The artwork is fantastic, the comedy is well written, the characters are a lot of fun to tag along with, and the setups stick with you. Like I said, the manga never got an official publication outside of Japan, but you can read a fan translation by PowerStone05 on the internet. The entire translated manga has been archived on Untamed Heart Klonoa Collective, so go check it out there if you're interested. Next up is 2005's Namco X Capcom, a Japanese exclusive crossover title featuring a lineup of Namco and Capcom characters. As far as I can tell, it's something of a precursor to the Project Cross Zone titles in the Nintendo 3DS, which both got an international release. In addition to a bunch of other Namco characters from franchises I know nothing about, Klonoa and Guns also make an appearance as playable characters, with Jenga and Joka appearing as villains. If you squint your eyes closely enough, you might also be able to make out Klonoa in the lower right-hand corner of the game cover. The game also features a remix of Stepping Wind from Lunatea's Veil and Guns' theme from Klonoa Heroes. I really can't say anything about the gameplay since I haven't played it and I have no interest in it, but I am disappointed that Bandai Namco didn't bring Klonoa back for the Project Cross Zone games. I mean, Bandai Namco produces the games and they own the rights to Klonoa, so why not? It's almost like they want the series to revel in obscurity, but I digress. Otherwise, I don't really have much else to say about this game. It's an action RPG crossover game that just happens to star Klonoa and company. Because of that, I thought it was worth a mention, but I don't think it's worth reviewing in depth for the sake of this marathon. If you're interested in playing this game for yourself, you'll be glad to know that an English translation patch has been floating around for about 8 years now. If your computer's good enough to run PCSX2, that's probably the best way to play it if you can't read Japanese. Last on our list is Klonoa, Dream Traveller of Noctis Sol, an official webcomic released in 2012 and written by Jim Zub. The comic was released on ShiftyLook.com, a Bandai Namco subsidiary that launched in 2011 with the task of revitalizing dormant Namco franchises through webcomics, browser games, and other media. The site did find some success, with the comic based on the obscure Japanese-only arcade game Wonder Momo getting a hardcover release, and the game itself seeing a sequel for iOS Android by WayForward Technologies in 2014. As you know, one of Shifty Look's projects was Klonoa, Dream Traveller of Noctis Sol, which represents Bandai Namco's second attempt to drum up interest in the Klonoa series and potentially bring him back for a new game. Noctis Sol ostensibly takes place at the end of the Klonoa timeline, and opens with Klonoa reminiscing on all of his previous adventures. Our story begins with Klonoa reuniting with Hupo, who has summoned him to a strange new world. The duo is attacked by the mysterious Nighty Knights, led by the villainous Tenebrae Hue, which have invaded Phantom Isle, Lunatea, and a number of other dream worlds. Visualizing a threat to peace in Lunatea, Lolo and the High Priestess send Papka through a portal to find someone who can restore balance. Meanwhile, Klonoa and Hupo sneak into Hue's fortress and discover that he's building a mysterious machine to harness the power of the Night Sun, or Noctis Sol. Eventually reuniting with Papka, Klonoa and Hupo must uncover Hue's ambitious plan and put a stop to it before it's too late. What's really great about the story in Noctis Sol is its sense of scale. The plot could easily be adapted for a final installment of the main game series that ties everything together and shows Klonoa making his final stand against the forces of evil. Unlike the manga, which brought all the familiar characters together under its own setting and continuity, the webcomic treats the events of all the previous games as canon, including Klonoa Heroes and Klonoa Beach Volleyball, which is wonderful.
simple. It would have been so easy to just include the console games and ignore the rest. The comic is littered with references to previous games in the series, including the black and white Moonlight Museum game and the Bandai WonderSwan. On top of all of that, there's a lot of fan service too, like this part where Hyupo and Lolo both power Klonoa's wind ring at the same time and emulate his tornado attack from Klonoa Heroes. You can tell that Jim Zub knew the series very well and had a grand vision for building upon what was already there. Unfortunately, much like Bandai Namco's previous attempt to bring Klonoa back on the Wii, it wasn't to last. ShiftyLook.com eventually closed down in March of 2014. Officially, this was because the site staff felt they had done their jobs and that it was time to move on, but my guess is that Bandai Namco wasn't getting the returns they were looking for, probably due to a lack of advertising, so they decided to pull the plug. All of the ShiftLook-inspired smartphone games, including WayForward's Wonder Momo sequel, were also delisted from the app stores around that same time. Needless to say, that's a colossal shame. Not least because Klonoa Dream Traveller of Noctis Sol ended at issue 65 on a huge cliffhanger, with no plans to complete the story. That being said, I can absolutely recommend Dream Traveller of Noctis Sol to fans of the series, even in its uncompleted state. The artwork is gorgeous, the writing is solid, and the story itself an epic capstone to everything the series has done up to this point. Obviously, you can't read the comic on the original website, seeing as it no longer exists. The good news is that a UHKC user named Surreal Brain was kind enough to archive the entire comic on klonoathecomic.org. Just type the comic's name into your preferred search engine and it should be the first thing to come up. Dream Traveller of Noctis Sol is a great comic and a worthy contribution to the series.
And I think that's it. There might be a couple of obscure mangas I didn't talk about, but for the most part I've covered all the Klonoa related media that's worth discussing for the sake of this marathon. Cool.
What else can I really say about Klonoa at this point? Calling the series underappreciated is a serious understatement, and looking at some of the lesser known media in the franchise for the first time has only cemented my love for everything Klonoa. Between Yoshihiko Arai's unique, impressionable art direction, the cast of memorable, likable characters, the upbeat yet stylized music, and the simple but well-developed gameplay, it really gets you thinking, why didn't Klonoa become the next Sonic the Hedgehog? Why did this creative, passionate, and genre-busting franchise fall into obscurity, while something as ordinary as Crash Bandicoot went on to become a multi-million bestseller? I'm not saying Crash didn't deserve his success or his fan base, just that from my point of view, Klonoa has a lot more to offer. Based on a collab video I just did with my buddy Haydox, I'm inclined to believe it was a lack of advertising that killed Klonoa in the long run. I was incorrect in my Klonoa 2 review when I said Lunatea's Veil was the best-selling game in the series. Interviews with Namco executives show that Door to Phantomile was a surprise hit in Japan, and that's why they followed up with 6 more games in the late 90s and early 2000s. Lunatea's Veil and the rest failed to hit the financial targets the company was shooting for, and that's why the franchise ultimately went dormant. And ultimately, that was Namco's own damn fault. The advertising for the games was abysmal, and so Klonoa came and went with minimal fanfare. You can't just launch a new IP and expect it to become a bestseller. Unless your property is recognized and well known, you're gonna have to market it. It's simply business 101, but I guess the marketing gurus at Namco thought that buying a few spots for some slapdash commercials was all they needed.
Wahoo! Get ready for an exciting adventure as you help Klonoa save Phantomile, a magical world created by everyone's dreams. Use the wind bullet to grab your enemies and wave your Wii remote to throw them.
Let me be clear when I say that there are many other potential variables, such as the transition from cutesy platformers to mature shooters in the early 2000s, that no doubt contributed to Klonoa's ultimate demise. But clearly the games would have done better with a stronger marketing campaign. All that being said, is Klonoa really the most underrated IP in gaming? Did he deserve better? My answer to those questions is essentially yes, but considering that Klonoa never did so hot financially, it's actually quite impressive how much Klonoa-related content we got in such a short period of time. We got 2 console games, 3 handheld puzzle platforming games, an action RPG, a sports game, a remake, a 2-volume manga, a cameo and a big shot crossover game, and to top it all off, a kick-ass webcomic. Almost all of it was good, if not great, and much of it launched within the space of a couple years. Compare that to something like Tamba, which got a couple games and then dropped off the face of the earth altogether. I'm not saying that Klonoa didn't deserve better, but he still got a pretty good shake, all things considered. And that brings me to the other question. Is Klonoa underrated? I'd say no. I was talking about this with my pal Retropolis Zone a while back, go check him out by the way, and he helped me make a very important distinction between underrated and overlooked. Mega Man 7 is underrated, but still well known. Sonic Lost World is another underrated game, at least in my personal opinion, but everybody's heard of it. Almost everyone who's looked into Klonoa seems to like what they've played, with many singing songs of praise and clamoring for further installments in the series. The unfortunate fact is that many people just don't know about Klonoa, as Haydox and I learned from our collab. And that's why I've wanted to do this marathon pretty much since I started this channel. And that's also why I wanted to review all 8 games in the series and not just the console titles. I'm certainly grateful that reviewers like Mike Batey of Cinemassacre.com have devoted time to talking about the likes of Door to Phantomile or Lunatea's Veil. In fact, it's thanks to that review in particular that I even learned of Klonoa in the first place. But there's so much more to this franchise than just the 2 PlayStation titles, and it's unfortunate that so few reviewers seem interested in tackling the rest. That's why I wanted to do my part and take a look at the more obscure games in the series, including the ones that were never released in North America. I wanted to show off what makes this series so special and unique. I'll admit it though, keeping up the motivation to see this marathon through to the end wasn't easy. There were so many projects I wanted to start but couldn't, and 8 games for one marathon is no small order. But at the end of the day, I'm quite glad that I did. All these reviews didn't quite get the viewership I was hoping for. All the comments from Klonoa fans thanking me for giving the series more exposure, as well as all the people who tried out some of the games and enjoyed them based on my recommendation, made it all worthwhile. If you still haven't played any of these games yet, I implore you to spend the $6 in the PlayStation Network to download Klonoa Door to Phantomile for yourself. Given the low price and the fact that you can finish it in an afternoon, you really have nothing to lose. If you like what you see, I strongly encourage you to check out the $7 GBA games on the Nintendo eShop, or even drop the cash for a copy of Lunatea's Veil on the PlayStation 2. I swear that you won't regret it. As for the Klonoa fans out there, I hope I've given these games the reviews they deserve. Once again, I recommend checking out Untamed Heart Klonoa Collective if you haven't already. The folks at UHKC have built a fantastic community for Klonoa fans, and I'm sure they'd love to have you on board as well. Let's also not be so quick to give up on a new Klonoa title or an official remake of Lunatea's Veil. Bandai Namco has been surprisingly committed to revitalizing the series in the past, and has been consistent in re-releasing Klonoa titles on PSN and the Nintendo eShop. With luck, we'll see the Dream Traveler again someday. But until that day comes, we've got a collection of great games to whet our appetite.
Once again, I can't thank you folks enough for supporting this marathon. This may be the end for Klonoa, but there's still some summer left for a few more videos. So I'll see you guys next time for a new review. Until then, I'm ExoParadigmGamer, and I hope you all enjoyed the marathon.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go! Don't leave your garbage lying around. It's a total dick move.